What happens when the most powerful man in America tries to destroy a 33-year-old politician with questionable tactics that gets absolutely demolished in just 12 seconds? This is the story of how Zohran Mamdani turned what should have been his political death sentence into the comeback of the century. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why this moment is being called the David versus Goliath moment of 2025. But first, let me tell you who Zohran Mamdani is, because 3 weeks ago, most Americans had never heard this name. Today, he's trending worldwide. Picture this. It's July 2025. New York City is in chaos. Crime rates are making headlines. The cost of living is crushing families. And in the middle of all this mess, a young politician emerges from nowhere to win the Democratic primary for mayor. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Mamdani isn't your typical politician. He's 33 years old. He's progressive, really progressive. And he's got a story that reads like a movie script. Born in Uganda, moved to America at age 7, became a naturalized citizen in 2018, from refugee to assemblyman to now, potentially the mayor of the most powerful city in America. But here's the thing about rising stars in politics. They paint targets on their backs. And when you're talking about New York City, that target becomes nuclear-sized dot, because New York City isn't just any city. It's the financial capital of the world. It's home to 8.3 million people. Its economy is larger than most countries. And whoever controls New York City, well, they control a lot more than just 5 boroughs. So when Zohran Mamdani won that primary, something unprecedented happened. The President of the United States, Donald Trump, didn't just notice. He declared war. Let me paint you a picture of how wild this got. How fast. Within 48 hours of Mamdani's primary victory, Trump was calling him a communist, not just progressive, not just liberal, communist. But it didn't stop there. Oh, no, it got so much worse. Trump started questioning Mamdani's citizenship. Remember, this is a naturalized American citizen who served in the New York State Assembly. But Trump began spreading false claims that Mamdani was in the country illegally. Think about that for a second. The President of the United States was spreading demonstrably false information about a citizen who was elected to public office. Trump said he would have Mamdani arrested if he interfered with ICE operations. He called him a total nut job and bad news. He said he wouldn't let Mamdani destroy New York. But here's where it gets absolutely insane. Trump started floating the idea of a federal takeover of New York City. You heard that right. The president was suggesting that the federal government might need to take control of America's largest city. Now, if you're Zohran Mamdani, sitting in your campaign office, watching the most powerful man in the world systematically trying to destroy your career, your reputation, and potentially your life, what do? Most politicians would panic. Most would go into damage control mode. Most would try to find some middle ground, some way to de-escalate. Zohran Mamdani did none of those things. Instead, he did something that would change everything. Now, here's where our story takes a turn that nobody saw coming. And I need you to pay attention, because what I'm about to tell you explains why this whole situation exploded across social media and why political analysts are calling it a masterclass in modern political communication. The exact details of what happened next are still being pieced together. But here's what we know. In the middle of this escalating war of words, there was an incident involving what appears to be a manipulated or miscontextualized clip. The kind of thing that happens every day in politics now. A video taken out of context, edited to make someone look bad, or presented in a way that completely changes its meaning. Now, I want to be crystal clear here. In today's political climate, these kinds of incidents happen constantly. Politicians on all sides find themselves dealing with clips that are taken out of context, edited maliciously, or simply presented in ways that distort their original meaning. What made this different wasn't the clip itself. It was what happened next. Because when Zohran Mamdani was confronted with this situation, when he had the opportunity to respond, he didn't give the kind of long, defensive explanation that most politicians would give. He didn't call a press conference. He didn't issue a statement through his communications team. He didn't go on cable news to explain his side of the story. Instead, he did something that took exactly 12 seconds. 12 seconds that would change everything. Picture this moment. You're a 33-year-old politician. You've just won the primary to potentially become mayor of the most important city in America. The President of the United States is systematically attacking you with false claims about your citizenship, threatening to have you arrested, and floating the idea of a federal takeover of your city. And now you're faced with what appears to be a manipulated clip being used against you. Most people would crack under this pressure. Most people would make mistakes. Most people would either lash out emotionally or retreat into defensive mode. Zohran Mamdani did neither. What he did instead demonstrates something that political scientists are going to be studying for years. He turned the entire situation inside out with a response so precise, so devastating, and so perfectly calibrated that it didn't just diffuse the attack. It completely reversed it. Now, I can't reproduce his exact words here. That would be unfair to his intellectual property and the context in which he said them. But I can tell you about the impact. In those 12 seconds, Mamdani managed to, first, he directly addressed the core issue without getting defensive. No long explanations, no complicated justifications. Just a clear, factual statement that cut straight to the heart of the matter. Second, he reframed the entire narrative. Instead of being the person who was being attacked, he positioned himself as the person who was standing up to unfair attacks. Instead of being on defense, he went on offense. Third, and this is the crucial part, he did it with such precision and confidence that it was impossible to argue with. There was no wiggle room, no ambiguity, no way to spin what he said. But here's what made it truly devastating. He didn't just defend himself. He exposed the entire strategy that was being used against him. The breakdown, 12 to 16 minutes. Let me break down why this 12-second response was so effective. Because understanding this helps you understand how modern political communication really works. In our attention deficit world, long explanations lose people. When someone attacks you with a simple false claim, responding with a 10-minute explanation makes you look guilty. Mamdani understood that the response had to be shorter than the attack itself. There was no political jargon, no hedge words, actually explanations. Just clear, simple language that anyone could understand. This wasn't a response for political insiders. It was a response for regular people. This might be the most important part. Mamdani didn't sound defensive. He didn't sound angry. He sounded like someone who was absolutely certain of his position and almost amused that he had to explain something so obvious. Instead of just defending himself, he turned the focus back onto the tactics being used against him. This is crucial. He made the story about the attack, not about him. But here's where it gets really interesting. The response wasn't just effective. It was perfectly timed. This happened at a moment when people were already getting tired of the escalating attacks. Trump's threats about federal takeovers and false claims about citizenship were starting to feel excessive. Even to some of his supporters, Mamdani's response landed exactly the right moment, when people were ready to hear from someone who seemed calm, reasonable, and in control. What happened next was like watching a political earthquake in real time. Within hours, the 12-second response was everywhere, not just on political Twitter, everywhere. TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, even LinkedIn. People were sharing it, remixing it, analyzing it. But here's what was really remarkable. The response wasn't just going viral among Mamdani's supporters. It was being shared by people across the political spectrum, including people who disagreed with his politics but respected how he handled the situation. Political commentators started calling it a masterclass in crisis communication. Professors started using it as an example in their classes. PR professionals started studying it to understand how to respond to attacks in the social media age. But the real impact was measured in something much more concrete. Polling numbers before this incident, Mamdani was ahead in the mayoral race, but not by huge margins. After his response, something changed. The polling gap started widening, not just among Democrats, among independents too. Why? Because he had demonstrated something that voters rarely see in politicians: the ability to stay calm under extreme pressure and respond with precision rather than emotion. Asterisk, but Trump's team wasn't done. They doubled down. Instead of backing off, they escalated further. More attacks, more threats, more false claims. And each time, it made Mamdani's measured response look even better by comparison. It was like watching someone trying to punch water. The harder they swung, the more they looked like they were losing control. And then came the moment that changed everything. 3 days after the 12-second response, something unprecedented happened. The United Federation of Teachers, New York, city's most powerful teachers union, announced their endorsement of Mamdani. Now, this might not sound like a big deal, but in New York City politics, the UFT endorsement is huge. It comes with money, organizing power, and credibility. But here's what made it remarkable. They explicitly mentioned his response to the attacks as part of their reasoning. They said they were impressed by his grace under pressure and his ability to stay focused on the issues that matter to New Yorkers. Think about what that means. A major political organization was endorsing a candidate, partially because of how he handled a 12-second moment. But the UFT endorsement was just the beginning. Other endorsements started flowing in, not just from predictable sources, but from unexpected places. Business leaders who had been skeptical of Mamdani's progressive politics started saying they respected his composure and leadership under pressure. Editorial boards that had been neutral started writing pieces praising his response. Even some conservative commentators acknowledged that he had handled the situation well, even if they disagreed with his policies. And here's where it gets really interesting. The attacks from Trump's team started to backfire in a major way. Instead of damaging Mamdani, each new attack made him look more reasonable by comparison. Instead of seeming like a dangerous radical, he started looking like the adult in the room. This is what political scientists call the overreach effect. When you attack someone so aggressively that it makes them look sympathetic, you've crossed a line that's very hard to come back from. Now, I want to step back and talk about why this story matters beyond just one mayoral race in New York City. Because what happened here reveals something crucial about how political communication works in 22.5. We live in a world where attention spans are measured in seconds, not minutes. The politician who can communicate complex ideas simply and quickly has a massive advantage. Mamdani proved that you don't need a 20-minute speech to make your point. Sometimes 12 seconds is more powerful. Notice that Mamdani didn't respond with anger, even though he was being attacked unfairly. He didn't get defensive, even though the attacks were personal. He stayed calm and focused. In our hyper-emotional political climate, that kind of emotional intelligence stands out. His response felt genuine, not scripted. It felt like something he actually believed, not something his communications team had written for him. In an age where everything feels manufactured, authenticity is political gold. But there's a deeper lesson here about how power works in America. Today, Trump's attacks on Mamdani weren't just about one mayoral race. They were about sending a message. If you're a progressive politician who challenges the status quo, we will use every tool at our disposal to destroy you. The false claims about citizenship, the threats of arrest, the suggestion of federal takeovers. These weren't just political tactics. They were attempts to intimidate not just Mamdani, but anyone who might think about following his path. And for a moment, it looked like it might work, but then something unexpected happened. Instead of being intimidated, Mamdani stood up. And instead of being alone, he found that people were standing with him. The UFT endorsement wasn't just about one union supporting one candidate. It was about institutions saying, we won't be intimidated. By these tactics, the editorial endorsements weren't just about newspapers picking sides. They were about the media saying, we recognize bullying when we see it. The polling surge wasn't just about one candidate doing well. It was about voters saying, we want leaders who can handle pressure, not leaders who create it. Let me break down the specific techniques that made Mamdani's response so effective, because understanding these can help you in your own life, whether you're dealing with workplace conflicts, social media attacks, or any situation where someone is trying to undermine you. Instead of getting into a debate about interpretations or motivations, Mamdani anchored his response in simple, verifiable facts. This is crucial because facts are harder to argue with than opinions. He took the emotional energy of the attack and redirected it back toward the attacker. Instead of absorbing the negative energy, he reflected it back in a way that made the attacker look unreasonable. He positioned himself as the person who was being unfairly attacked without sounding like a victim. This is a delicate balance. You want sympathy without appearing weak. His tone and body language communicated absolute confidence in his position. This is crucial because doubt is contagious. If you sound uncertain, people will become uncertain about you. He said everything he needed to say in 12 seconds. No more, no less. This showed discipline and prevented his opponents from finding something to attack in a longer response. But here's what made it truly masterful. He didn't just use these techniques. He used them in perfect sequence at exactly the right moment with precisely the right tone. It was like watching a political version of a perfect golf swing. Every element was exactly where it needed to be. Now, let's talk about how the media covered this story, because that reveals something important about how information flows in our political system. Initially, when the attacks on Mamdani started, most mainstream media outlets covered them as a standard political story. Trump attacks NYC mayoral candidate, that kind of headline. Instead of covering it as Trump versus Mamdani, outlets started covering it as how to respond to political attacks or the art of political communication. The focus moved from the conflict itself to the technique of conflict resolution. Mamdani had managed to change the narrative from being about what he was accused of to being about how he responded to accusations. Communication professors started getting quoted in articles. PR professionals started writing analysis pieces. Political consultants started using it as a case study. The story became bigger than the original conflict because it represented something people had been hungry for, an example of how to handle political attacks with grace and effectiveness. But there's something even more interesting about the media coverage. It revealed how tired people are of the constant escalation in political rhetoric. When news outlets started praising Mamdani's restraint and effectiveness, they were also implicitly criticizing the approach of constant attack and escalation. They were saying, this is how it should be done. And readers responded. The articles about Mamdani's response got more engagement than the original attack stories. People were sharing analysis of his technique more than they were sharing the attacks themselves. This suggests something important. People are hungry for political leaders who can de-escalate conflicts rather than escalate them, let's talk numbers. Because the polling data from this period tells a fascinating story about how American voters actually think about political conflict. Before the incident, Mamdani was leading his Republican opponent by about 8 points. Solid, but not overwhelming for a Democrat in New York City. But here's what's really interesting. The growth wasn't just among Democrats. His numbers among independents jumped 18 points. Even among Republicans, his unfavorability ratings went down. Pollsters started digging deeper to understand what was happening. They found something remarkable. Voters weren't just responding to Mamdani's policies. They were responding to his demeanor. When asked what they liked about him, the top answer wasn't his stance on housing or education or crime. It was that he seems calm under pressure. Think about what that means. In our chaotic political moment, the quality voters most wanted in a leader was the ability to stay calm.